I spoke to many of these Muslim, former Muslim, agnostic Muslim, moderate Muslim, whatever you want to call them, guys saying, if we don't take the lead in breaking this thing open, the countries that we have fled to are going to look like the countries we fled from.
It's extraordinary. So part two, which we've sort of hit on a little bit, but the European establishment abrogates responsibility for women's safety. Now, we thought that these liberal societies were supposed to stand up for their women, but we're not seeing this. I mean, everyone knows what happened in Germany a couple of years ago on New Year's. There's a lot of examples of, in essence, these countries throwing women under the bus in the name of diversity or something like that.
So about 10 years ago, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, I had a discussion with my friend Christopher Caldwell, who wrote a lot about immigration in Europe and the consequences, intended, unintended, positive, and negative. And I said to him, he said, we were talking about European values. And I said to him, you know, one day the Europeans, they probably won't stand up for freedom of speech. They won't stand up for this value. They won't stand up for that value. But you know what? When their women are threatened, they'll stand up for women's rights. And he just took on that expression of, you know, the wise old man. And he said, you're so optimistic. I don't know if they will stand up for anything.
Wow.
And I'm terrified to say that he was right and I was wrong.
Do you think that was just naivete on your part? I mean, you come from a place where you knew about these things. I mean, do you think that was just sort of an optimist way of looking at the world, that, oh, when it really starts affecting these people, they will do something? Or do you view human nature a little differently after a couple of years?
I think the first thing I'll say is, because I was surrounded by European women who were strong and who had fought for all of this stuff and gained it and took it for granted, I thought they would be first in line to say this is unacceptable. So I think that maybe it blew me, it misdirected me into thinking that, you know, there's going to be, I know that there were all sorts of confrontations happening, but when you come for the little girls and you come for the women, you know, society is going to say, that's a red line. And so I have to confess that I got that wrong. I think I also got wrong the class element. That wealthy, middle class women with university degrees, they're organizing around causes such as the glass ceiling. They want to be CEOs. They want to be on board leaderships and stuff like that. They want to be chancellors and prime ministers, and that's what excites them. And there was a lot of conversation about childcare so that you could have 50% of parliament be female. And that's what middle-class women are preoccupied with. And I didn't realize that there was that disconnect between working-class women and middle-class wealthier women, and that's what I'm seeing now. And maybe that's why in the beginning, when we were just talking about immigrant women, Muslim women, you know, stuff that they're subjected to, most people were looking away because it was, you know, not just foreign and they didn't understand it, but it was also, you know, it wasn't their problem.
Right, so that's what's so fascinating about it, because when it was just sort of their problem in their own ghettos, sort of separate, okay, that's one thing. But then when you add this element of cultural relativism where you're no longer allowed to say, I mean, this is what we've seen. We see women get raped on the streets. We read about grooming gangs, although you don't really hear anything in mainstream media here. But if you read those things, and you're not allowed to say that those specific people who hold those specific views, that those views are worse than our views. Everything's equal.
Everything is equal. And they've been saying that for a very long time. David, I spoke to Tino Sanandaji, who's a Swedish economist.
I had him
great
on
guy.
a long time ago. I should have him on again.
Yeah, he told me He was on my podcast. I interviewed him for the book. He said to me that there is an interesting development that the people who are actually coming out now and talking about these things are immigrant men and women. And I asked him, do you think that there is a possibility that working class women, local native white women, could actually ally with immigrant women and immigrant families who've had enough of the crime, who've had enough of the disruption? You know, remember, they fled their countries in search of a better life, in search of stability and predictability. And they're now being confronted with this mess. What is the likelihood that working class families, men and women, but especially women, and immigrant women could actually form an alliance and fight this thing? He's optimistic on that. He said in Sweden, you know, they're the ones at the forefront of people who are trying to break open the taboos are immigrant women. So immigrant women, immigrant men, immigrants. I spoke to Mustafa Panshiri. I spoke to Hamid Abdel Samad in Germany. I spoke to many of these Muslim, former Muslim, agnostic Muslim, moderate Muslim, whatever you want to call them, guys saying, if we don't take the lead in breaking this thing open, the countries that we have fled to are going to look like the countries we fled from.
Yeah, and then of course, as you know, our friend Majid Nawaz, who started Quilliam in the UK, who hates him? It's the lefties. It's the lefties that hate him, right? I mean, who's always trying to cancel him, even right now trying to get his radio show off LBC. It's the lefties, because they're now trying to frame him, a Muslim man from Egypt, as a racist. I mean, it's you know a little something about this from your own story.
He went to Egypt when he was radicalized, but I think his heritage probably lies somewhere in Pakistan.
Okay.
But it's exactly that. It's exactly. It's the demonization of anybody who wants to break this open. And I think that they are becoming less and less successful, because you now see the rise of the far right, you see the rise of populist parties, you see this despair. Again, I want to go as an example to the president of France, who has to, you know, he has to defend his presidency from Marine Le Pen or Front National, and developments like that. The far left will continue to try and silence everyone, but they're not succeeding because people are suffering. You know, what the book tries to do is some of the anecdotes. That's a description of real human pain. And so the more you say I told you some of the victims, they say, I'm not far right. I'm for immigration. I vote for left-wing parties, but I've been raped. I've been subjected to this type of, you know, sexual violence, and I don't want that.
Right, of course. Well, you don't want everyone to have to be raped, in essence, to wake up, right? Like, that's what we're trying to stop here.
That's what we're trying to stop. We're trying to stop the crimes. And so I think we are maybe at a moment in some European countries more than others. I think that's where Denmark got to. It's a smaller population. Austria, they were talking about a rape epidemic. I mean, just think about that. Before the pandemic, they were talking about a rape epidemic. And that's what forced the authorities to do something about these things. And so these attempts at silencing people by labeling them, taking away, as you described, Majid's podcasts and platforms and things like that, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And I'm old enough, let me tell you this. I mean, I love the internet. I'm a proponent of the internet. I think it's one of the best things that happened in my lifetime. But I'm old enough to know when there was no internet, when there were no cell phones, when very few people had landlines, and yet we communicated. So you can, you know, the tech giants can say, I'm going to take your platform away, good luck with that, but people will find ways to communicate. But the sad story is, if you say we are going to marginalize and silence certain views, you then have to deal with the unintended consequences of censorship, and censorship Never works. Never worked.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about international issues instead of nonstop yelling, check out our international playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.